Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 6, Episode 23, presented by Marketile. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, our second last of the season, we're thrilled to have the opportunity to host one of the savviest technology and retail reporters, someone whose work on Land of the Giants podcast series set the bar high for anyone who aspires to help us all understand digital retail and its impact on society and business, Jason Del Rey.
Yeah, Jason's a guy whose work I've followed for quite some time. And actually, the day we released this, his book, Winner Sells All, which details the evolution and the rivalry between the two biggest retailers on the planet, that would be Walmart and Amazon, for those of you keeping score at home who might not know that, it's out today, and it's a great book, and it's a really interesting interview.
All right. And it's a touch longer than a usual interview. It got so fascinating. We could have talked to Jason for at least another hour. It was really a rich interview. So let's get into the news. Let's do a quick overview. So it's a big week for macroeconomic news, so to speak. So sometimes in our news, we like to start about the overall economic picture. What did you make out of the latest kind of threads of discussion in the news around the overall economy?
Well, I think the biggest change was what happened with monetary policy. So the U.S. Fed, after a lot of toing and froing on the part of people watching this, ended up not raising interest rates this time. They're taking a pause, but they definitely signaled that they thought more increases would be necessary to tame inflation. So I think that's kind of what ultimately people were expecting. Remains to be seen, obviously, as to where they're going to end up the balance of the year. And then the European Central Bank, they broke from tending to follow what the U.S. Fed does by lifting interest rates 25 basis points. I think it's not terribly surprising that they moved higher, given that inflation has been running a little bit hotter in the UK as well as in the EU countries. So not surprising. And generally, the view on inflation is that it is improving, but it's still quite persistent. The numbers have looked a little bit better, but some of that has been driven by cheaper energy prices, which, that's hugely volatile. Food continues to be the area improving, but, tending to really push inflation up. Rent also continues to be high. One of the things that came out last week, there was a story, I think it was in the New York Times, that I thought was interesting, is this so-called revenge spending. It's like spending on travel and just luxuries, kind of in general, personal luxuries and otherwise, seems to be moderating a bit. They pointed out that spending at hotels is actually now lower than 2019. And
really?
That was surprising. Yeah, surprising to me. So I don't know if there's...
As people, you and I, who try to book hotel rooms to go to conferences, I don't see it. Maybe we're going to the wrong places or the right places.
Yeah.
In Europe, the news out of Europe is it's just jammed. I mean, we saw some of that even when we were at the World Retail Congress in Barcelona. I remember you and I looked around and are we in June here? There's a lot of people traveling. So that was interesting news. I found that.
Maybe there's some anomaly there. I don't know. But anyway, something to look out for. So maybe this, services versus products thing is not quite as true as it's been, but we'll see. And then just really quickly on monthly retail sales, I guess to a certain degree, kind of same story, different day.
Is that month over month? Is that more important than year over year?
I'm not talking about that. I'm going to focus on the year over year numbers until the day I die. It is. I'm shaking. But really the headline is that sales growth, in general is pretty much keeping pace with the rate of inflation. When you dip below into the category breakouts, as we've been saying, it seems like for 5 or 6 months now, pretty much the same story. Big ticket, appliances, furniture, consumer electronics continue to be down. Department stores continue to be down. The leadership categories are health and beauty, personal care, going out to eat, and as well as kind of a bounce back in e-commerce, or at least the number they use, which is kind of a proxy for e-commerce, not exactly that. And then everybody else is just kind of, moderate. So very much a polarity, I think, in terms of what's going on there. But again, that's pretty much been the pattern for the last few months.
You and I have been talking about what's going on in San Francisco, and I guess the debate or discussion between us, as it is amongst many people, is San Francisco kind of a canary in the coal mine to what's going to happen to big cities if they're not careful, with a big bet on office buildings and employment. And we had some news out of San Francisco that caught our attention, and we wanted to cover it. It kind of sparked our discussion again. Talk about that.
Yeah, just really quickly. So several weeks ago, we talked about Nordstrom closing their flagship store at the Westfield Mall in downtown San Francisco. That was quite surprising. And then more surprising news, Westfield, the owners and operators, or I guess the operators of the mall, they're walking away. They handed the keys or are handing the keys back to the landlord. Wow. That mall is not working. And when that opened, I remember pretty well when that first opened, it was quite a showplace. And there were a lot of really top brands there. So I think as we've touched on a bunch of times, the just reduction in daytime traffic in particular in some of these urban areas because of the work from home, hybrid work, whatever you want to call it, phenomenon is really shifting, kind of changing the dynamics of the retail environment in many places. San Francisco's definitely had some more issues in terms of homelessness and crime than some cities. So I'm sure that's a contributing factor. But I think a lot of this really stems back to the daytime traffic is just down a lot because people aren't in the office either at all or nearly as much.
Well, I think it's the challenge of our age, I think, is how to figure out what cities do if everybody's not downtown. I mean, for decades, they were built around, a lot of people going to work in an office building. And I think we need to adjust that. And
absolutely.
So fascinating to watch. Speaking of fascinating, Overstock bids $21.5 million for Bed Bath & Beyond, intellectual property. What on earth is going on here? Like, is that their customer list or their private brands?
Yeah.
Like, is that what they're doing?
Yeah. So this story may be updated significantly by the time this episode comes out. We're recording this on Friday. Overstock put in a bid for $21.5 million. Rumors that they were able to take advantage of a 20% off coupon in placing that bid, I understand, are not true. My sources are telling me that.
Maybe they'll do a BOGO. Maybe get box thrown in the
Yeah, could be. But the court asks for bids on various assets. And so they put in what's called the stalking horse bid, which is kind of the first bid that sets the price for others to come in and try to beat. So we'll see if there are other options. There are a few rumors about some folks that may be submitting bids.
And that's the list. To be clear, that is they're selling the customer list, their email list?
Well, a bunch of things, but yes, it's not their stores. I guess that's the most important thing to say, or in any inventory, though, at this point. I don't think there's much inventory left. It's really customer lists, brand name, some of the, they've got some private labels, which turned out was maybe not that awesome. So yes, it's intellectual property. Right. I think actually in the scheme of things, it's potentially pretty valuable. What they have, wedding registry, that kind of those kinds of things. For Overstock, which is a pretty sizable player and certainly has a big position in home categories and gift categories and things like that, it sounds like a bit of a bargain. But again, the bidding process, I believe, will wrap up in the next week or so. So we'll see if that's successful.
I want to move on to Kroger. Now, Kroger put out their earnings. We haven't done much earnings this episode, but these ones are important for a couple of reasons. One is I'm keeping a close eye on Kroger because of the Albertsons merger, which we should, which is every day there's more news on that. But I also think that their news kind of connects back to a couple of your predictions. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, there's two reasons to talk about this. They are a huge grocery store and they did have earnings and really kind of the only earnings story of the week. And from an earnings perspective, their sales growth was pretty anemic, only up about, I think, 3.5%. So when you think about inflation, that doesn't sound like real growth, but they did manage to increase their profits quite substantially. So some gross margin expansion, some expense reductions. That was pretty good. But the tie to my predictions, and as we mentioned last week, we're not going to do a formal mid-year review of the predictions as we did last year. So we're just going to kind of weave them in through some of these mid-year episodes. And one of the things they talked about, so my prediction was that trading down will largely define the year for retail more broadly. And they definitely talked about how their private brands in particular were performing very well, that there was a real shift to private brands, which generally speaking are more value oriented, as well as they were seeing more high income, kind of like some of the stuff Walmart said, seeing some more high income shoppers shop with them. And Kroger, being a very moderate price grocery store, that's maybe a shift from some of the more upscale grocery stores. So I think that's very much in line with this trading down phenomenon that I think we will continue to see a lot of action in the balance of the year. And then the other thing they'd spent a lot of time on was the growth in their media networks. And my prediction there is not that media networks aren't going to be important. I believe there will be continue to see a lot of growth. But I think some of the early estimates are overly aggressive, and we'll start to see some moderation or at least some growing pains. Now, they didn't talk about the growing pains. What they did talk about was how big their media networks are. And Sucharita Kodali actually pointed this out on LinkedIn. I mean, they're still really tiny. So this idea that media networks are going to be big contributors to profits very soon, not so much seeing that yet from Kroger. So I was kind of surprised, given all the hoopla, particularly supermarkets are one of the big potential partners for media networks. I kind of expected the number to be quite a bit bigger. So good growth, but still a long way to go before they're really meaningful to Kroger and presumably others.
All right. Well, that was the news. Now, before we get to our excellent interview with Jason Del Rey, a few words from our presenting sponsor. If you're a retailer hungry for a better way to gain useful insight on the impacts of your store layout, design, and strategic initiatives, you need to know Marketile. Marketile is an easy-to-use testing platform that emboldens great decisions, leading to reliable, scalable results. With Marketile, you can be confident in the outcome of your in-store pilot initiatives before rolling them out across your fleet. Validate your remarkable ideas with Marketile's in-store testing solution. The proof is in the testing. Learn more at Marketile.com. That's Marketile.com.
Well, I am very excited to welcome Jason Del Rey to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. He's a guy whose work I've followed for quite some time, so this is a real thrill. Jason, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, and really am thankful we're having this convo today.
Well, we are, there's a lot we could talk about, but the primary reason we have you on is you've got this great book that is coming out today, the day that we're releasing this episode. But we'll get to that in a second. I imagine a lot of our listeners are familiar with your work. If they're not, we should shame them because it's such important stuff. But maybe for those who may not be as up to speed, maybe you could just tell us a bit about who you are, the work you do, kind of your personal and professional journey.
I'm a longtime journalist, mostly focused on business journalism. I did have a few pit stops early in my career, sports journalism and breaking news and the like. But for the last, let's call it about 16 years or so, I've been a business journalist, and the last decade focused almost exclusively on covering retail, e-commerce, and the future, of the omni-channel world. And so I've done that mostly for a publication that has had a couple of names in its history, but was first called All Things D, or All Things Digital, run by Kara Swisher and Walt Mossberg, two sort of famed technology journalists. And then under the Recode brand, and eventually under the Vox.com brand as well. And so really have become a person who likes to nerd out on the space. I mean, you can't really stick with writing about a space for 10 years and not really enjoy it and learn along the way. And so that's my background.
Was journalism kind of always in your future? And then as you think about being a journalist, what part of it do you like the most? Is it kind of the investigative part, or the storytelling, or what exactly?
Yeah. So I wanted to be a sports anchor. And I don't know if it was my Staten Island, New York accent that dashed those dreams or what. But, I did go that I always wanted to do something in the journalism field, and really enjoyed writing as a kid, enjoyed reading a good amount to and didn't know exactly where in journalism, I might fit best. And so I thought for a long time sports journalism, really enjoyed it, and happened to go back to grad school, though, to get a journalism degree. By no means, necessary for everyone, but it was a good thing in my case for me. And I came out, and the truth is, there were not a lot of sports journalism gigs out there. But at the time, this is now in the mid-aughts, so I don't know, 2006, 2007, there were a lot of business journalism jobs. Little did we know what was about to implode over the next couple of years, but really grew to love business journalism. I started at Inc. magazine, where I wrote about startups and small businesses. I'm from a family of not journalists, but small business owners and entrepreneurs. And so, I really, really sort of continue to gravitate to those types of stories. Did a couple of years at Advertising Age, covering basically my own field, digital media and advertising technology. Little aside, I thought I was long done with ad tech and DSPs and the like, and it's back in a big way in our industry at least. And so trying to adapt to that, and then I loved Advertising Age, loved covering media, but I had an opportunity to go work for journalists I really, really respected, Kara Swisher, Walt Mossberg,
Sure.
a colleague named Peter Kafka, who covers, I think is, to me, the best media journalist on the planet, and jumped at that opportunity. And they said, well, there's one little thing. Peter already covers media, so we have this one opening. It's commerce. And I'm proud to say they didn't call it e-commerce back then. It was just called commerce, and the main focus was Amazon. And then, that was 10 years ago, the day before my son was born. And 10 years later, still having a lot of fun covering the space and these very important companies.
Part of the reason for the question, and now maybe we can really dig into your new book, is part of what I really enjoyed about your new book, Winner Sells All, Amazon, Walmart, and the Battle for Our Wallets, is there is, to me, an aspect of not only this kind of investigative journalism, or kind of getting way behind some of the things that probably many of us already know from paying attention to the space, but you also do a great job of telling stories, and it, in a way, almost feels a bit like a novel at times. But before we get too into the weeds on that, just for our listeners, give us a sense of what the book is about, what motivated you to write it, and kind of what you hope the reader will get out of experiencing the book.
Sure. And I realize I didn't answer part two of your last question, which was, how I look at the work I do and like what I enjoy most. So just quickly, sometimes it does, I do really, really enjoy the reporting aspect. And for me, that is digging in behind the press releases, behind the, quotes on TV, and trying to figure out really what is going on inside a company, what a company's motivations are, who's driving those decisions. So I think they're important. It's important for the public to know that stuff, especially when we're talking about big companies with so much impact like Amazon and Walmart. I do enjoy the writing part of it, but I definitely, I would say I love the reporting and digging part, the explaining part, and then the writing. Something I've gotten better at over the years, but it's still, all these years later, I still consider it a work in progress. And I think every great journalist, or ones who aspire to be great, like myself, are always trying to learn more. So, the book, I really try to chronicle the rivalry between Amazon and Walmart, the evolution of that rivalry over, a long period of time, and then go inside key inflection points in that rivalry to help explain to people why the world that these two companies have created looks the way it does today, and then to look ahead a little bit and try to help inform the public and people in the industry on what might be coming next from these companies. And there's been, great books written about Amazon. Brad Stone, a journalist I look up to a lot, between the Everything Store and Amazon Unbound, has done a terrific job chronicling Amazon's rise and impact. And there are some great journalists covering Walmart in sort of a day-to-day basis at big publications and indie publications as well. But what I was trying to do was really get inside, in a deep way, Walmart's transformation attempts mostly over the last decade. Because frankly, I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think. I think they've been sort of undercovered in sort of a deep way. And I mean, beyond sort of the day-to-day news announcements. And so I think it's a lot of people think Amazon's sort of the sexier story, and I get that. And I go inside their decisions as well. But I really think, just looking at Walmart's size and impact today, I just thought there were a lot of important stories to still tell about this transformation they're trying to go through. And so, that's what I tried to get at throughout the book.
Yeah, just one quick comment on that. One thing I found particularly interesting, and I've certainly paid a lot of attention to both these companies for quite some time, so I feel like I'm pretty well versed, but I learned so much from reading your book. But I would agree in particular that the story of a huge legacy retailer responding to disruption in the way that Walmart has, and maybe as we'll get into a little bit, they got a slow start, I would say, for sure, and had some bumpy patches along the way. But it's really interesting, and I guess maybe I'm having been at Sears many years ago in a company that didn't make those changes. I find that particularly interesting. So yeah, I think it is uncovered, and I think you do it in a really, really interesting way, and kind of the comparing and contrasting with Amazon makes it particularly interesting.
And I'd add in, I think what makes it particularly readable is they both, in a way, start from the same place. They're both customer focused, but their approaches to how they go at that. I mean, there's many, many quotes that they live by at Walmart and Amazon as well. It's all about the customer. So they start at the same place, but they go in different directions and end up in different things. So it really makes for a great read. I want to change tracks a little bit and talk about your tradecraft for a minute as a journalist and a reporter. So I think this is your first, hardcover book edition, and you've explored many, many media types, audio. You could have you've done some great series and podcasts, and could have done a number of different things. Was a book always in you? Did you always want to write a book? And was this kind of something that you just wanted to accomplish, or you thought this was the best media to convey the message and the results of your reporting? And I guess the follow up is, who did you write it for? Who do you want to read? Sure.
So I'll try to hit each of those. I'll be super candid. Like I've always, since I was set on being a journalist and started, in my career, I did always want to write a book. I'm a big reader, and just I thought I had one in me at some point. And yes, like that accomplishment was something I hoped would make sense at some point in my career. That said, I told myself, I hope I don't sound too much like an Amazon executive talking about differentiation in new markets, but I did always tell myself I would only do it if I felt like I was the best person to take on that topic, or one of a few, right? And so something, as I was thinking about books over the years, I did notice that a lot of journalists who cover this space either focused on just the e-commerce side of things, like the pure plays, or just the quote unquote traditional retailers, or the folks who started in brick and mortar. And I didn't see a lot of instances of journalists really covering both sides, or Amazon and Walmart specifically, at the same time in a deep way. And so as I started to cover Walmart even more, we can get into this after they acquired Jet.com in 2016. I thought there might be a story like this that could make a great book. You mentioned, I've written for a while for digital media publications. I did have, the Land of the Giants podcast, the first season, which I love. I really loved, and really would love to get back to narrative podcasting at some point. But I thought, I have not made a movie yet. So maybe someday in the future, I'm not sure if this is it, but perhaps. But I did think this story once I talked it through with an agent, had interest from publishers. I thought it was deserving of a book length treatment, and whether that's audiobook or ebook or print, I don't really care. I actually, a little plug for the audiobook. I think the narrator that I selected along with my publisher, I think he's fantastic, and I hope for people who love audio, they'll consider the audiobook version of Winner Sells All. But just to wrap up, I think for all those reasons, I was excited about the idea of a book. I know you had other questions in there that I probably ignored. So if you want to remind me, I'll try not to ignore them.
We try to pack at least 4 questions into one question.
Our guests often ask us, is there a question in there somewhere as we're saying these things? I was just going to add on. I think I'm excited to have the book turned into a series. I guess it may or may not be on Amazon Prime. It might be on Netflix. Anyway, that's a whole other rivalry.
I mean, listen, that is a real discussion we could have at some point, but probably don't have time for it today.
Well, let's tap back into the book for a bit. Over and over again, there's just fascinating. I certainly found it fascinating inside stories of the evolution. I mean, that someone who wanted to start e-commerce in a big way at Walmart kind of wasn't getting traction, so he wound up over at Amazon, and then he had to stop on his way on the highway because there was some lawsuit stuff. I mean, there's just so many great stories that make that make this book come to life. But are there any that stand out in your mind that, as you were writing them or as you reflect back, that really jump out?
Yeah, definitely a few. I'll try to go through quickly. The one you just referenced is definitely one of my favorite anecdotes in the book, and I get to it right in chapter 1, so I'm not giving too much away if people haven't read it. But an employee at Walmart, tech-savvy guy in the 90s who was sort of leading a small team that was experimenting in the mid-90s with online retailing for Walmart. He thought he would be there for life, really, really loved the company. Still to this day cares a lot about the company. He's now retired and I believe in his mid to late 60s, a guy named Robert Davis. And as far as I can tell, and what he's told me, he's never told this story publicly. So it was exciting to find him and then hear from him. And essentially, he wanted a bigger commitment from Walmart all the way up to the CEO in the mid 90s, just to sort of corral the company, get leaders together from different divisions, and just say, like, we believe in e-commerce, and we're gonna do what we need to make sure we're giving ourselves the best bet.
Answer this guy's phone call, basically, because I've been in that same position. Pick up the phone, return the email. This is important to us, right? I mean,
right. And so he doesn't get, I won't give away too much more, but he essentially doesn't get what the commitment he thinks is the opportunity deserves. He packs up his pickup truck, starts the cross country trek from Bentonville to Seattle, where he had been offered a job and by another former Walmart exec, and along the way finds out that Walmart is suing Amazon for trade secrets. And so, I have a fun little anecdote in the book that I, and we could get to who I hope, reads this book. But, I think in a book like this, where I'm trying, I want, anyone who cares about commerce and the commerce industry to think it's a no-brainer and a must-read. But I think there's a lot of smart people who care about the impact of these companies and, are curious. And so stories like this, I think, just help to make the book a little more readable and accessible for those who don't live and breathe this industry, as their line of work. And so that was one. Just quickly, this was a surprise, also, fun to learn. I didn't realize how much inside Walmart, people still talk about 30 years after Sam Walton died. What would Sam do? I talk, and maybe I should have known that, but I was just struck by a bunch of folks who came into the company over the last few years from sort of e-commerce backgrounds, and they were just they were just, blown away, mostly, not in a super positive way a lot of the time by, just how much Sam came up. And, one of them had a quote, which I kind of get. It was could be a little bit cold, but this person was saying, like, listen, Sam is Sam. And I'm speaking, of course, of Sam Walton, founder of Walmart. And Sam is Sam, we should care about the values he instilled in the company, but essentially, like, Sam's gone. Like, Sam's gone. We can't be living in the past. And so that was another thing that sticks out. And then just lastly, I have one of my favorite chapters, chapter 8, which is sort of the unsexy logistics side of the world, of the retail world. And, I've what I think is a never told before story of Walmart's attempts to come up with a way to reinvent the middle mile at the company. And it stars a bunch of folks who had worked at Amazon for a long time, thinking they've found this solution, this path forward. And at the last minute, they're overruled by Walmart CEO Doug McMillon. And there's all this speculation about the role that FedEx founder Fred Smith may have played in that decision, since FedEx and Walmart are such deep partners. So I'll take a breath and stop there. But those are some of my favorite parts off the top of my head.
Well, that's part, I think, of what makes the book so special and creates a lot of intrigue. We could probably I'm sure we could spend an entire podcast just on this topic. So I don't know if we could compress it to just a few minutes, but you go into a fair amount of detail about the Jet acquisition and just in general, how that the decision to acquire Jet, have Mark Lowry in the company, and just kind of all the tentacles that sprung out from that impacted Walmart's strategy. I think there's some people that believe they greatly overpaid and that was a smart move. Other people that think like that was the thing that unlocked this new omni-channel blurred world future for them. Can you maybe just quickly give people a little bit of a reminder in case they're not familiar exactly with the context for that? But generally, what's your view on whether you think the Jet acquisition was a good thing?
Sure. So, quick background. Mark Lowry, entrepreneur who years ago first started Quidsy, which was the parent company of diapers.com. Amazon ended up acquiring diapers.com. Walmart was involved in those talks as well. And I have a couple of those acquisition, stories in this book, another one in the healthcare industry, where both companies are competing for essentially the same acquisition target, the same startup. And Mark went to Amazon after that deal, worked for a couple of years, then left. May have been starting an idea for a new company while still at Amazon, not clear, but eventually started Jet.com, which, there's a chapter in the book just about the wild year and a half of Jet.com's existence as an independent company. Ends up selling it to Walmart for $3.3 billion. Some people saw it as a $3.3 billion acqui-hire, and that, Walmart was not really buying a sustainable business, was buying Mark and his team. And so, yes.
And the option to lose several $100 million in the months that followed as well, right?
And I mean, that is true. And so was that deal a success or not? I'm going to give you maybe somewhat unsatisfactory answer, which is it depends what your definition of success is. And if your definition of success is, changing the narrative of Walmart as a digital laggard, for in both hiring circles and the technology industry and frankly on Wall Street, if your definition of success also includes, frankly, just shaking things up, making some folks think differently about what the future of the company could look like. And, if your definition of success includes bringing in some outside strong technical talent, I think you can make a fair argument that it was a successful deal. Now, if you look at Mark and team's decisions more on one-off situation, acquisitions they made, startups they tried to incubate, and the like, and just the overall cost, and you look at how some of those decisions panned out one-off in sort of a one-off manner, like it becomes sort of a more complicated, story. And,
Sure.
The big question for me is, and it's sort of impossible to answer, is how much missed opportunity was caused by some of the disagreements and tensions I get into in the book between Mark and his team and the leadership of the physical side of the business mostly, which at the time had a very, very difficult job on their hands, without worrying about Mark and team, growing but losing a lot of money. And that was, trying to get the stores back on track, which of course still is and was at the time, the core of the business.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting is just, and maybe this where we can kind of take the conversation next is just to kind of bring the Amazon side into it, is maybe a little bit of comparing and contrasting, not sort of on the facts about Amazon and Walmart. Everybody's probably familiar with that, but just kind of their kind of core DNA, I think, as you describe it in the book, and Amazon coming from digital only startup kind of mindset versus Walmart being very anchored, obviously, in physical retail and even just, being anchored in a small city, small town kind of background. Mm-hmm. Is there any kind of just big takeaways that you've got from comparing their style and how they approach innovation and cultural change and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that. One thing though, just one thing related that was surprising to me was, Amazon is famous for these two pizza teams, essentially small autonomous teams with folks with different specialties that are essentially, designed to move fast without needing to communicate all over the company. And some would look at them as mini startups in a way. And so the origin of this, goes back to, among other people, a guy named Rick Dalzell, who was a former Walmart executive who became Jeff Bezos's first CIO. And Rick described to me for the book how some of the influence for the two pizza team, or a lot of it, actually came from something at Walmart back in the day called strategy teams. And there are differences. You were not ordering two pizzas for those teams, I don't think. But anyway, that was something that was very interesting to me, something I learned I didn't know before. So yeah, DNAs of each company. I think at Amazon, like the idea of the two pizza teams and, really setting up these autonomous, groups of 10, 12 people to test out new ideas, to build and try to scale, and with limited resources, but also limited disruption from the outside world, outside bureaucracy at Amazon, I think sort of speaks to a lot of why they were able to move so fast for so long and try so many things in so many different parts of the business world. Walmart, to expand supercenters like they were aggressively, for decades, they needed sort of, there needed to be a playbook. There needed to be, according to folks there, more of a top-down execution. And I think for a lot of, in a lot of ways that was core to their success. But I think it also slowed down decision making and created complications as they really tried to figure out what the digital world means to them and meant to them over the years. Under some new leaders recently, they've been trying to restructure and think about how to move faster. One thing I didn't note in this conversation, I spoke to almost the entire C-suite at Walmart. This is not, I like to say that this is not a book of access. Like my book is, I talked to over 150 people overall, but, I talked to Doug McMillan, the CEO in Bentonville. We met, and he said, like, we're moving faster in a lot of parts of the org than we once did, but I'm still dissatisfied overall with our lack of speed. And so I think that's just, that's something they're working through. The last thing I'll say just about companies' DNA, we see some of Amazon's struggles in physical retail, and I'm sure you guys probably, maybe, I'm curious, foresaw this. I think a lot of people in the media world, journalists, people who work in pure play e-commerce and technology just assumed like these guys are the smartest guys and gals in the room and they will figure it out. And like the truth is their DNA is what it is. And I think that's, partly why they've had such a a hard wake up call in the physical world that, I think they entered it with a little bit of arrogance, but also just, having to learn a lot. And so anyway, I'll stop there, but those are some of the keys I've learned along the way.
Jason, I love how we've created a pizza index for how the two companies kind of approach things. It's how many pizzas in the meeting. So I think it takes 100 pizzas in a meeting to get some of those big Walmart supercenters done by the sounds of it. Listen, what's always struck me as I thought about this over the years is, reflecting on, would Walmart be the company it is today, the retailer it is today? Because you're right, they do anchor themselves in Sam Walton and they do anchor themselves in the customer. Some days over history, they've struggled to be a more contemporary retailer. Do you think, reflecting on what we know, do you think Amazon has actually made them a better retailer, a better company, that strong, wily, kind of nimble competition? Do you think it's improved Walmart? Would you reach that conclusion?
I think so, but the part I struggle with is that, Amazon has existed right since the mid 90s and really, hope I don't offend anyone too much, but really until the last, 3 to 5 years, it's been really hard to see, the impact of that rivalry and the pressure Amazon has applied manifest itself in a way at Walmart that I think is actually, a better thing for customers. And, I still have questions about, is this a better experience for customers overall at Walmart today? I think it is. Ordering something online and the magic of, I'm putting magic in air quotes, but the magic of thinking it might show up in 2 days, but it actually lands on your porch that same day because Walmart is now effectively in some areas rerouting stuff.
Their curbside game is super, super strong, right?
It is. The parts I worry about, I thought there was an opportunity when we talk about the marketplace that each company now runs online. I thought there was a way that Walmart might try to differentiate that was not just opening up the marketplace to every seller under the sun and all the problems that creates for really everyone, the company, the customers eventually and sellers. And instead, they've largely seemed to just follow the Amazon playbook there. And so I hope it doesn't blow up in any meaningful way for either company, because that would mean it blew up for consumers. But that's one part of the the space that I do worry about. Both just as a consumer and just as someone who thinks these companies have a lot of influence over everyone's everyday lives.
Well, Jason, obviously we can only kind of look at the tip of the iceberg here, and a podcast. I would really encourage people to go check out the book. It's it's just a font of interesting stories, but I think in particular, there's a lot to be learned on the part of just about anybody I can imagine in the retail ecosystem. So I'll put a plug in for that. Just as we wrap up, I'm curious, as you look ahead, since you followed these companies very closely, and obviously you follow the broader world of commerce, are there any things in particular that you think are most important to really monitor as we go? I'm not thinking so much the next few months, but kind of as we go into the years ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to admit that in the past, when I would read coverage or hear coverage and the word healthcare would come into play, there was a period of my journalism career where my eyes would glaze over, just because disruption is so few and far between in the space and the incumbents are so entrenched that, it just seemed like the status quo was going to remain, and why am I going to bother, digging in? And I forced myself for this book to dig into both companies' ambitions in the space, just because it just could affect all of us beyond our lives as quote unquote consumers. And so, I did a lot of work. I had a lot of help from great sources to write a chapter about what their ambitions and motivations are in the healthcare industry. And that is the space I just, yes, of course, I'm curious what happens with, how they treat employees, with new businesses they go into, with, new innovations, social commerce. But I think just just as a citizen of this world and this country, I really do care about what they end up doing or failing at or trying to do in the healthcare space, from online pharmacy to health clinics to virtual care. And I really think we're going to be a decade from now, hopefully they've made things better for some people in their efforts, but that's the space that beyond, most of the book is about sort of the retail world we know and breathe. But I would just encourage people to read chapter 11 in my book about healthcare and their ambitions, but also just follow along in that space because they're both committed to it, it seems, and there could be profound impact for all of us on the other end of this.
Our guest is Jason Del Rey. The book is Winner Sells All, Amazon, Walmart, and the Battle for Our Wallets. Available today wherever you buy books, perhaps Amazon or Walmart, or wherever else you buy your book. Jason, thanks so much for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Real treat for me. I've been a big fan and follower of your work and really enjoyed reading the book. And on behalf of Steve and I, thanks again for carving out the time and joining us on the pod.
My pleasure.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, so you can catch up with all our great interviews, including Judith McKenna, President, International, Walmart. New episodes of Season 6, presented by our friends at Market Dial, will show up each and every Tuesday. And be sure and tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
And I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and producer, and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn even more about me on LinkedIn, and you can see both of us at the Lead Innovation Summit in July, live on stage in New York with our friend of the pod, Simeon Siegel from BMO. Until then, safe travels, everyone.